Well, good evening, good evening, good evening. My name is Renita Walker, also known as the Funky Chaplain. Indeed, the funkiest chaplain you know. I'm doing a little bit something different tonight. A lot of you know me from the Sunday sermons, but tonight I'm going to do a little bit of teaching. This is the first of a 7-week series called Intro to Spiritual Care. So, for the last 10, 12 years almost, my anniversary is in the fall. I have been a chaplain in acute care settings, in long term care settings, and in nursing homes. And part of that time, I have been training, and I have been training others who want to be a chaplain as well. And I recognize that some folks are not going to be involved in those traditional methods as far as seminary, as far as clinical pastoral education in a traditional setting. And so, what I am trying to do is bring spiritual care and spiritual care education out of the hospital, out of the institutional setting, and into the world. So, like I said, this is a 7-week series starting tonight. We're going to have a little break next week because I don't want to bother you for your holiday in case you're going to celebrate it. And then we'll continue on. So, one of the things I love to do in my sessions is let you know what we're going to do. And so my grandfather would always say, my grandfather is a preacher, he would always say, tell them what you're going to say it, and then tell them what you said. So I take a lot of that and a lot of his wisdom with me as I minister and as I do things with the people. So let's get into it. This is Intro to Spiritual Care. This is week 1, June 28th. This is Spiritual Care 101. I'm going to introduce the course, and I'm going to talk to you about some important terms that you will need as we go forward and have our discussions. And we can continue these discussions online on Facebook. I would love for you all to comment, and I will continue to interact with you even when the live presentation is done. Week 2, remember I said next week we are going to have a week off for the 4th of July holiday. So week 2 will be July 12th. We're going to talk about cultural competency. Cultural competency is a way to identify your social location and address the biases that we may have as we bring to ministry and spiritual care. And listen, I'm going to tell you, I'll say this now and I'll say this on week 2. We're going to meet this with no judgment. Everybody has biases. It's just a part of being human. We bring a lot of things with us, with how we were raised, the culture that we come from, our identity, our intersectionality. All of these things come with us and affect the way that we provide care. And it's okay. The good thing to do is identify it and then learn how to address it. So at the very least, we don't hurt nobody. But at best, we want to help. We want to really be able to care for people and know our stuff as we do it. Week 3 is going to be July 19th. We are going to talk about effective communication. And communication is a bridge to emotional connection. Communication is really important. What I have found in my work is that when we communicate with people, we think we're saying a thing, but that person may actually be hearing something totally different than what we were saying. Why? Because of their social location. So our social location we're going to build on these concepts. Our social location we hear things in different ways. We have different connotations, different cultural understandings of certain terms. I saw something floating on Facebook today about being Black and about some of the phrases that we use that if you're not Black and you didn't grow up in our culture, you wouldn't even understand. Like, ooh, I'm scared of you. Well, it doesn't really mean I'm afraid of you, right? So being able to understand how communication and how what we communicate to others has meaning, and being able to have good, effective communication. Week 4 is July 26th. This is going to be our grief module, honoring grief and acknowledging losses. Grief work is community work. If you want to provide spiritual care to people, you are going to have to address grief and loss. And this is going to be really, really important in the work that we do. You and I'm assuming those of you all who are watching are doing work in your communities. Honoring grief and acknowledging loss is going to be really important as we do this work, because we have had a lot of losses over the last couple years, from the pandemic to personal losses to watching the politics in this country, the Supreme Court ruling. I mean, it's a lot going on out here. It's a lot going on out here. And the way that we make it through these things, the way that we survive and thrive is together. So grief work is community work, and we'll get into that week 4. Week 5 is going to be August 2nd. Week 5 is about spiritual needs. We're going to be assessing and addressing 7 spiritual needs. When you do spiritual care, it's really important to be able to identify spiritual needs, to be able to assess the need, the level of need, the severity of the need, and to have responses where you can actually address the spiritual needs. So we're going to talk about spiritual needs on week 5. Week 6 is August 9th. And we're going to talk about core values, and I'm going to show you how to do a values inventory for yourself and for your organization. The importance of a values inventory is that I can now, once I understand what my core values are, I can use those values to inform the work that I'm doing. And it's super important, so you're not kind of flying by the seat of your pants and coming up with all of these things that you want to do, or saying yes to things that don't even coincide with your values. So we're going to take a values inventory. And then week 7 is going to be August 16th. Week 7, spiritual care is healthcare. And I am going to be waving that flag and championing that cause for a while here, because as we start talking about Medicare for all, healthcare for all, I am going to make a case for spiritual care as an integral part of our healthcare model going forward. We definitely are making a case for physical medicine for all people, regardless of, income and that kind of thing. We are doing so much better with mental health care, and taking the stigma away of mental health care and helping folks get mental health care. And there still is a deficit, because there are more need than there are professionals to provide mental health care. But we're doing a great job of saying, hey, if you need help, get help. But we're forgetting about spiritual care, and spiritual care is healthcare, is super important. And I'm going to talk about it. And I'm going to talk about how research has already shown us that spiritual care is important to positive healthcare outcomes. So there you see, this is what we're going to be doing during this course. I hope that you will come each week, take some notes, get what you need. If you have some questions, I'll be available to you within the Rethinking Church community. And if you're watching this through my profile, I'll be available to you there as well. So that's good. That's what we're going to do for the next 7 weeks. It looks like a lot. How are we going to fit it in there? Trust me, we're going to do it. And it's going to be a good time. I promise you that. I promise you that. All right, so this is week 1, Spiritual Care 101. What are we going to do tonight? Well, tonight we're going to talk about spirituality versus religion. We're going to talk about, we're going to talk about the evolving nomenclature. Things used to be called pastoral care. That's what we heard a lot. And now we're talking about spiritual care. So, and I will talk about why that is and why it's important to make that a broader term. And then we're going to talk about what is spiritual care. What am I even talking about when I say spiritual care? So those are the 3 things that we are going to do tonight. These sessions will be about 45 minutes to an hour. And it probably just depends on how talkative I am, because I'm an extrovert and I like to talk. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. So let's get into it. Spirituality versus religion. They overlap, but they are not the same. Spirituality is broad. Spirituality is about meaning making. Where do I find meaning in my life? Spirituality is about connection. How do I feel connected? And I like to talk about connection in three ways: connection with my understanding of the divine, the universe, my ancestors, whatever my spiritual beliefs are. Remember, spiritual beliefs are broad. And so that you all won't be surprised, when I talk about spirituality, I'm talking about a very broad understanding of spiritual beliefs. And so, although I am Christian and I grew up Christian, I provide care for a lot of people. And I hope to broaden your horizons as you go through this, because even if you are Christian, you may encounter someone that needs spiritual care from you that is not Christian. And so if I can help you think about spirituality outside of your religious preference, it really will help you provide care to the person using your religious preference as your guidance, but allowing them to maintain their identity and their religious preference. So where do I feel connected to the divine, the transcendent, the universe, my ancestors? How do I feel connected to myself? Super important. A lot of us have seen folks that seem to be disconnected from themselves. And sometimes that happens with trauma and abuse. It also happens because, honestly, in a capitalist system, the best way to keep people bound and oppressed is by disconnecting them from their own sense of themselves and their values and their needs. Remember, we're going to have a values inventory later. So, connected to the divine, connected to myself, and how do I feel connected to others? That is important as well. Community is super important. Community is why a lot of people enter into religion, because a lot of them come with community, and it's an easy way to find community. You find a religion, you have a religious preference, and you find a community that matches that, and it helps you with your connection to others. And then, how should I live? This is about values again. What are my values? What do I value, and how should I live in light of those things? Now, when we talk about religion, we're talking about something a little bit more narrow than spirituality, okay? So we talk about religion. Religion is about practices, rites, and rituals. So interesting, my daughter is reading an almanac right now. Brainy child, I love her. The child I love. But she's reading this almanac right now, and she came across a part about religion, and she was like, well, what is Eucharist? Well, what is communion? Well, what is the Lord's Supper? I'm like, it's the same thing, but depending on what religious preference, what tradition you follow, it has a different name. And so that religion is about practices, rites, and rituals. How do we honor the living? How do we honor the dead? When we come together, what are the things we do together as a community? That is where religion comes in. Morality, what is right and wrong? Now, I'm going to have a caveat here, because I also think that spirituality has a very deep understanding of right and wrong. Some folks call it universal law, but there are some universal principles. I don't care who you ask, killing, murder is wrong. Most people, no matter their religious preference, murder is wrong. So, but this is about what my particular tradition, if I'm Christian, the Bible, if I'm Muslim, the Quran, if I am Jewish, Torah, the law, the prophets. If I'm Buddhist, y'all are with me, right? And then what is true and false? Now, here is where religion can get us into a little bit of trouble because of its narrowness, because there are some religions that are uh, uh, at odds with regards to what is right and wrong and what is true and false. And so this is how you can get into trouble if you begin to try to provide religious care to people, because they may not believe the same thing you believe about what's right and what's wrong, what's true, what's false. And so this is why we're providing spiritual care. And is when we stay with meaning, connection, and how should I live, we're in some safe space and we can walk with people in that thing. Now you can see in the middle where these two things overlap. Beliefs. Often my religious beliefs and my spiritual beliefs overlap in this way, right? And so if I'll go back to the murder. What is right and wrong? What is true and false? Murder is wrong, right? And that is a truth that we'll stand on. Most religions will as well. But most people, even people that are not religious, that is a principle. That is something. How should I live? I should not murder other people. And so you can see there where they overlap. Comfort. My religious preferences and where I feel connected. This is where I talked about if I have a particular religious preference, I'm Christian. Let's say I grew up Baptist. I can go to a Baptist church and feel very comfortable with the practices, rites, and rituals in that church because I know them. I grew up with them. Whether I agree with them, they're right or wrong or not, they're very comfortable. And getting people out of their comfort zone sometimes can be a hard thing. And so even with spirituality, how do I feel connected? I'm going to connect in a way that makes me feel comfortable, right? That makes sense. So reflection. Often in both spirituality and religion, I am reflecting on the inner me. I'm reflecting on who I want to be in this world. And you can see how that overlaps between religion and spirituality, because my religious preference is telling me what is right and wrong and true and false. And I'm reflecting on how I can live according to those principles. Spirituality, where do I find meaning? I'm reflecting. I want my life to reflect where I find meaning, right? What are my values? I want my life to reflect that. So you can see how those things overlap. Ethics, absolute overlap in spirituality and ethics. And that's the murder example all over again. That's an ethical issue. Is murder right? Most of us will say no, right? Now, what you get into, and we're not going to go very far down this rabbit hole, but where you get into is what is right and wrong, even with the court ruling with abortion. Different religious preferences, different religious traditions have a different belief about whether allowing someone choice is right or wrong. The problem is when we are taking our religious preferences, which are supposed to guide me, and making them guide someone else. It doesn't work. It doesn't work, and we can get into trouble there. And then the last thing where we overlap with spirituality and religion is awe. Have you ever been in awe of something? So I'll give you an example. Sometimes when I see people in the hospital and I ask, are you spiritual or religious? And they'll say, well, I'm not really religious at all. I'm more spiritual. And I'll say, is there anything when you look around that just makes you just in awe of the world? And a lot of times they will say nature. They will say nature. And these are people that may be atheist or agnostic, like maybe there's a God, but I don't really know what's there. But there is something about nature that commands awe from people. Nature is, it's amazing. If you think about trees, the root system of trees is almost the same as the leaves and the branches that you see. A healthy tree has a deep root system, the same. Like, that is amazing. When you go outside at night and you see the stars in the sky and they're twinkling and you can see the planets when they're in alignment, and it is awe inspiring. Even no matter what you believe, whether you believe that God created it, whether you believe it was a big bang and it all came into being, it's amazing. It is awe inspiring. And so you can see how those things will overlap for people that identify particularly as spiritual but not religious, and even for people that identify as very religious. There is something awe inspiring about the world around us, about um, concepts like love. Like when you listen, you fall in love, it's an awe-inspiring thing, you know what I mean? But you can see how these things are different but have their overlap in the middle. So when we talk about spiritual care, certainly when I meet a person in a hospital that is very religious, we are definitely going to talk about practices, rites, and rituals. However, what we really are going to focus on is where people find meaning, how they feel connected to the divine themselves and others, and like, what do they make of what's happening in their life right now? How should they live, you know, in light of those spiritual beliefs? I hope that makes sense for everyone. Like I said, I'll be available later if something comes up and you're like, okay, help me with this. All right. All right. So that's spirituality versus religion. I hope that you can see and let me provide this caveat. When I provide spiritual care in the hospital, there is an ethical responsibility for a chaplain, a spiritual care provider, to avoid proselytizing. Now, what you got to know is I grew up in the 80s in an evangelical tradition. So we was knocking on doors, bothering folks at home, the same way that Jehovah's Witness still do. I think Latter-day Saints still knock on doors. But man, when I tell you we was out in neighborhoods knocking on doors with tracts trying to get people saved, I grew up in that environment. So it was really a cultural shift for me to be able to go to the hospital, go in a room, and provide spiritual care to someone of a different faith or no faith. And again, and someone put this in the comments, my faith is guidance for me. My religious preference, those rites, those rituals, those practices, what I believe is right and wrong, true and false, that is guidance for my life. When I go into a room with a patient, I'm trying to find out what their guidance is for their life. Because you know what? I'm not God. I don't want them relying on my faith, because I'm going to see these folks for maybe 10, 20 minutes. If they are really in crisis, an hour, and then I may never see them again ever in life. So me trying to give them something, trying to proselytize, is not going to help them. What's important is for me to help them connect to their spirituality, help them connect to where they find meaning and purpose, help them reconnect with their understanding of the divine, reconnect with themselves, reconnect with their relationship with others, so that when I'm gone, I have given them a tool to provide care for themselves later on. So I want to be clear that when we are talking about spiritual care, this is different than proselytizing, where I'm not going in the room to preach at people. Is not what I do. Now, when I'm in the room and they identify themselves as a particular religion and they can tell me what's important to them, if they're Christian and I'm Christian, we have some things in common and we can go there. But when they're not, I'm not there to convince them that my spiritual beliefs, my faith, my religious beliefs are more important than theirs, because in that moment they're not. They're not. What I believe ain't gonna help them when the dark night comes, the dark night of the soul. You understand what I'm saying? They're going to need their beliefs to help them, you know? So if you can begin to think about how to, or think about spiritual care as a way to provide people with tools in their toolbox, you just handing out tools. You just helping people have tools, because if they're in crisis right now, another crisis is going to come, you know. And I like to tell people, I am not Jesus. Jesus saves. I don't. And that's my own tradition. I'm Christian. Jesus saves, I don't. And I'm not out here to be Jesus. I'm not out here to be a junior Holy Spirit. I am out here to walk with people on their journey and find out what gives them meaning and purpose, so that when I'm gone, they know how to care for themselves. It's so important to take our own ego out of it, and to take ourselves out of the center, and really have care seeker focused ministry when we're providing spiritual care. I also want to say that I call folks care seekers, because if I'm providing spiritual care for them, that's what they're looking for. They're not looking for my theology. They're really not looking for my religious beliefs. They are looking for my care. They are seeking care because they're usually in some kind of crisis. And listen, a lot of people are in crisis right now, you guys. A lot of people are in crisis. The world is a mess, and lots of people are in crisis. Inflation, gas prices, healthcare. I mean, it's a mess. And people are looking for care, not theology, to be clear. To be clear. So I hope I've kind of driven this thing home about the difference between spirituality and religion, and how understanding that can help me provide spiritual care that gives care seekers tools so that later they can care for themselves. All right. All right, let's go in just a little bit further, because I really honestly, this is the foundation for spiritual care, understanding what we're talking about when we talk about spiritual care. Because a lot of us, and listen, I'm going to use some terms that may hit you and make you feel a little bit funny. And if they do, just sit with it and examine why they make you feel a particular way, and really, do some exploration within yourself. Many of us that grew up in our religious denominations have been indoctrinated in a particular way. We have been indoctrinated to believe that our religion is better and right, and everybody else is wrong. The problem with that kind of indoctrination is that, how can I care for someone that I feel like is beneath me? It's a problem. If I say that I'm walking with someone that's in crisis, how can two walk together unless they agree? Doesn't mean we have to agree religiously, but we have to agree on what we're going to be walking together. We both believe that there is healing available. Even if you're not in my religious preference, I can walk with you and provide care for you. So it's really important, and we'll talk about this when we get to cultural competency. It's really important to realize the stuff that I come with, my baggage, so that I know when I'm looking at someone in a particular way. People of other faith traditions and religious traditions are not beneath me. They're different than me. They are not beneath me. They are different than me. I want you to hear that. And so when we go to cultural competency in 2 weeks, we're going to talk about that. And we're going to talk about how that kind of indoctrination is a bias, and it informs the way that you provide care for people. And you got to be careful, because people see that coming. They know when you think you better than them. They feel it, they see it. People are not stupid. People have wisdom and intuition and whatever you want, the Holy Spirit, whatever you want to call it. People can see you coming and know that you think you're better than them. And so until you really begin to unpack that indoctrination, it'll cause you to harm people. And what I say at the beginning, at the very least, we ain't gonna hurt nobody. But at best, we really want to walk with people where they are when they are in crisis. So let's get a little deeper into the difference between spirituality and religion. Spirituality is a dimension of human experience involving transcendent beliefs and practices. What's transcendent mean? This is the dictionary definition. Transcendent is things that go beyond or above the range of normal or merely physical human experience. Let me give you an example. Some people call it uh, divine direction. Some people call it serendipity. Some people call it synchronicity. This is one of those situations where you end up in exactly the right place at the right time and encounter someone, and you like, I was supposed to meet you. I was supposed to talk to you today. This is wild. Sometimes when I'm at the hospital, I do things in a particular way because if I don't, I have some ADD, ADHD symptoms, and if I don't do things in a particular way, I forget things. I have to do it this way every time. Well, sometimes I get this urge, unction to switch things around. And I used to resist it because I'm like, oh my God, if I don't do it this way, I'm going to forget and I'm going to be messed up and I'm not going to be able to do my thing. And then as I began to really kind of loosen up, like, okay, yes, you can have this plan, but you got to leave room for the transcendent. Now, in my tradition, I would say we got to leave room for the Holy Spirit to move. And so sometimes I get this unction and this feeling that I need to go and do it differently. And so I'll go the way that I'm being led. And when I get there, it never fails. One of the nurses will say, I'm so glad they called you. And I'll say, nobody called me. I have no idea what's going on. And they're like, well, they had to call you. They did not call me. I was just following my spirit and came. They're like, okay, well, we glad you're here because somebody should have called you. We needed for you to be here. That is the transcendent. I can't explain that by physical human experience. I only have a spiritual explanation for that. Something, the divine, the spirit, my intuition, whatever, gave me some information that cannot be explained by physical human experience. It can only be explained in the spiritual. I hope that makes sense. And listen, it happens all the time. It happens at work. It happens at the grocery store. I had a conversation with a woman in Aldi's one day, and we just started talking because she liked my head wrap. And this is why I do my funky the way that I do it. It is part of who I am. And she liked my head wrap, and we started talking, and she was struggling. She was in crisis. She was in crisis. And so, okay, listen, I am a spiritual care provider. That ain't just my job. I just happened to find a job where I could do what I'm called to do, where I could do what comes natural to me. And so we had this conversation. I can't explain that with physical experience. That can only be explained in the spiritual. There is something transcendent about it. It is beyond the normal physical thing. You can't explain it, but you know, as my granddad would say, you know that you know that you know. That's the transcendent. Now, remember, when we're talking about spirituality, we're talking about meaning, connection, and value. So sometimes the connection that I make with other people, I can't explain that. I really can't particularly explain the connection that I make with the divine, with physical human experience. I ain't never seen God. Have you? It's spiritual. It's something I can't explain by with my flesh, with the human experience, you know. So it's very much about the spiritual experience, the transcendent things that are above and beyond just this physical body. Religion, this is a little bit of an expanded definition. Organized belief system. This is important because this will help you understand the difference. Spirituality, I can't explain it. It's nebulous. It's hard to grasp. Religion is very grounded, it's organized. There is an organized belief system with shared, institutionalized moral values and practices, often an involvement in a faith community, and for most, belief in God or higher powers. So we're talking about the God of the Bible, we're talking about Allah, we're talking about the ancestors, we're talking about our traditional African religions. These are organized belief systems that have these shared and institutionalized practices and beliefs and values. And so can you see how that is much more narrow? It can be explained. You can have rites of initiation, and I don't want any Christians to hear that in any particular way, because Christians, we have rites of initiation too: baptism, believers baptism, all that kind of thing. But there's rules and regulations to the thing, and so that is a much more narrow view. What do I believe to be right and true? So whereas spirituality is experiential, religion is principle. There are a defined set of principles for whatever religious preference there is out there. And there are many, 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 many. There are defined sets of principles, institutionalized values and practices. Okay? So I'm hoping I'm hammering this home. I'm belaboring the point because I want us to understand that when I talk about providing spiritual care, I am talking about the spiritual side of that bubble. Your religious preferences are a more narrow thing and are important as they tell us where you find connection. That you see how they're connected now. Excuse me, our religious preferences tell us where we find connection. I find connection in the Christian church. I find meaning in the Christian church. But I can find meaning outside of the Christian church too, because spirituality is broad. All right. I saw maybe a meme or a picture or something on Facebook where spirituality was the ocean and religion was the boat. That's a pretty good example. That's a pretty good example. All right. So let's talk about why the term spiritual care versus pastoral care. So we talked about the difference between spirituality and religion, and the fact that spirituality is broader and religion is much more narrowly focused. And that is one of the reasons behind this move to spiritual care. It's broad. So when I say spirituality to people, different people think a lot of different things about spirituality, and they usually think about their own particular spirituality. It's inclusive. When I say spiritual care, I am including people of different faiths or no faith. Now, that does not mean that they do not have a set of beliefs, values, and morality. Don't make that mistake. Just because a person does not follow a faith, for instance, I have provided spiritual care to many atheists in my time as a chaplain. And just because they do not claim a particular religion doesn't mean that they don't have values, doesn't mean that they don't have moral beliefs, doesn't mean that they do not find meaning, doesn't mean that they don't have connections with themselves and others and their belief system. They still have a belief system. They just don't have a religious preference or a faith as we would define it. Okay. Now, pastoral care is ecumenical, right? So, when we say pastor, you could be Baptist, you could be Methodist, you could be Anglican, you could be, it's Christian, right? But it is narrowly focused on Christian traditions. There's a lot of preconceived notions when I say pastoral care, and a lot of us, and I include us, I am one, we got church hurt baggage. So when I say pastoral care, there's some baggage there, and I may not want your pastoral care. depending on what my relationships have been like with pastors in my past, depending on what my relationships have been like with clergy and how I've been treated, and what, the last time I had somebody that was a pastor talk to me and they shunned me, or they did this, or they, so there's a lot of baggage sometimes that comes with the term pastoral. And again, it's not accurate for everyone. I'm not providing pastoral care to an atheist. They're not Christian. They don't believe in what pastor means. It's not relevant to them. And just because someone is, remember what I said now, I'm not better than them. I still want to walk beside them if they're in crisis. It doesn't, what they believe doesn't stop me from providing care to them. And so I don't want to put people off by a term that is very, very Christian. And so there's this move towards spiritual care. Now, what you have to understand is that for the most part, chaplaincy was formed by folks of Christian traditions. And so, of course, it was called pastoral care for a long time because it was a very Christian thing. But as the world is expanding, and even as the traditional clinical pastoral education is expanding, being able to train imams, Buddhist practitioners, and how to provide spiritual care to anyone and everyone, and folks of their own tradition, is super important so that everybody can get spiritual care. And I really, listen, I'm telling y'all, spiritual care is health care. Everybody deserves spiritual care. I don't care what your religious preference is, what your faith is, what your beliefs are. Everybody deserves spiritual care. And so that's the goal, to care for all people equally, no matter what your religious preference is. And like I said, I can't do that if I think that you are beneath me. And so pastoral care, pastor also gives kind of a, there, part of the baggage is the hierarchy that is, it's got some connotations and denotations. When I say pastor, for me, there's some connotations about, oh, this person is an authority figure. When I go in to provide spiritual care for someone, I'm not an authority figure in that room. They're the authority figure on themselves. They know themselves. I don't know them. I just met them. They are the authority figure on themselves. So if I'm going to walk beside them, then I have to ask a lot of questions. I have to learn with them. I have to explore with them. And so spiritual care, it really does not have the same kind of baggage that pastoral care has. So now, personally, I'm glad that the nomenclature is changing and we are moving towards the term spiritual care, so that people hopefully feel more comfortable with me meeting their needs, their spiritual needs, when they understand that I'm here for everybody. You in crisis, I'm here for you. Black, white, whatever your race, whatever your class, whatever your religious preference or none, I'm here to care for everyone. And so these classes that we're going to do for the next 7 weeks, this is for an internal exploration, so that when we are providing care to others, again, don't hurt nobody, y'all. We, at the very least, can we not cause harm? But these things are going to help us really think about things that you may have never even thought of before, that can absolutely be harmful and can really uh, um, inhibit your care for others. And I really do think, and when I was training chaplains, I believe this, that people that came to clinical pastoral education really wanted to provide the best care to people. They wanted to care. But the way to do that is to identify the ways that I may harm someone, identify these biases, identify the things that I don't even know that I'm holding that may harm others, but that inform the way that I'm providing care to someone. And when I can do that, when I can examine myself, when I can examine my thoughts, when I can examine the things that I believe, when I can examine the indoctrination, the values that I have that sometimes I don't even know they're there. It's called embedded theology. I don't even know this stuff is there until someone brings it to my attention and I am able to identify it and then begin to explore. So like I said at the beginning, as much as you can, come to this without judgment. We don't need you. There's no need for judgment. These are just things that we're going to learn about, and we're going to walk together, and hopefully you're going to learn some things about yourself, about the ways that you've been taught that may get in the way of you providing really good spiritual care to everybody, to anybody that you come across, even if they at the grocery store and at the cash register and you got to minister. You ain't got to preach at people to provide spiritual care. Okay. All right, this is our last slide. So we are almost done. What is spiritual care? So, one of the things that I love about clinical education is that it is very structured. And there are a lot of different tools and methods that you can use in each of these categories. And we'll talk a little bit more about each of them as our time goes forward. But this is what I mean when I talk about spiritual care. First of all, I need to make an assessment of what is going on with the care seeker in front of me. So, if someone comes to me seeking care, I need to figure out what in the world is happening right now. So, first of all, what is their spiritual need? What's happening? What is the crisis that they're having? People that are in crisis, what's happening is there is some critical need that's not being met. So, for instance, often when people come into the hospital, what's happened is that their connections have been interrupted. So, I'll choose a religious person for ease of example. People that go to church every Sunday, they on the usher board, they sing in the choir, and they get critically ill and end up in the hospital. They cannot go to church, and during the pandemic, their church family can't come in and see them either. And so now they have this hard interruption to a place where they felt very connected and now they feel isolated. And so we'll get into more of those spiritual needs, but connection is an important spiritual need. We need community. We need to be connected. And so when someone is seeking care, I got to identify, I need an assessment. What's happening? What's going on with them? What is their need? What are they expressing to me? One of the things that you will find is that a lot of people will not be able to tell you, I need this. And so what you will get is storytelling. People will tell you their story, and often they will repeat certain elements of their story over and over again because they are trying to figure out what's happening. And you can help them as you listen to their story. And when we get to week 5, we're going to talk about how those needs come out in storytelling, and we'll have some vignettes or some little short stories of stories that I've heard where you have to be a little bit of a detective and you have to hear, and we'll talk about this in the communication part, you have to hear what's not being said. And part of that is in communication and learning to understand feelings and what needs those feelings are identifying, what unaddressed needs. So we're going to have a good time when we get to the assessment pieces because it will help you make so much sense of the stories that people are telling you. And sometimes you're listening to someone, they're telling you this story, and you're like, what does this have to do with anything? Listen, I've been there, but you have to be able to kind of read between the lines and see behind the curtain of this story because the person is trying to understand the story themselves. That's why they're bringing it to you. They don't even understand what's going on with them. And so I'm going to give you some tools so that when you're listening to someone that is doing some storytelling and you're like, what is going on? Some tools that you can identify the underlying needs that need to be addressed. Sometimes the needs have different severity depending on what's going on in that person's life and what kind of crisis they're in and that kind of thing. But I'm going to help you with some tools so that you can learn to identify, assess the severity of the need, and address the need. All right. Then once I've made an assessment, now I need to respond. It is my responsibility as a caregiver. We have the care seeker. I'm a caregiver to respond to this assessment. And so we're going to talk about that in the assessments in the 7 spiritual needs module. We're going to talk about some assessments as we talk about spiritual needs as well. So in that example that I gave, that person is feeling disconnected. Part of my care response is literally connecting with them. You see how that's the remedy? Well, if I'm preaching at them, that's not connection. I want to make an emotional connection with them because they're feeling isolated and they're feeling disconnected. And there are some tools to help you with that too. We're going to talk about that as well, how to make an emotional connection. And that's going to be part of our communication module as well. Because part of how you make emotional connections with people is in what you say, is in how you respond to what they're saying to you, is in how you tell them you see them. You see the need that they're saying. You see what they're saying to you. You understand what's going on behind what they're saying to you and helping them do what I like to call meaning making. And sometimes I preached a message. This is my Job message, what to do when things don't make sense. Listen, people will bring you some stories of things that do not make sense. I don't know why people get cancer and die. I don't know why people get sick. I don't know why people are evil and abuse other people. I don't know. There are some things in life that do not make sense. But when things don't make sense, I can still make meaning. And the meaning making question is, what now? In light of all that has happened, in light of this horrible crisis, what do you want to do now? That's the meaning making question. It don't make no sense. And listen, the number of times that I tell people that, I don't know, it don't make no sense. It don't make no sense. What do you want to do now? And helping people feel empowered that they have the autonomy and agency to do something now. So we'll talk about how to respond to the assessment that you made, how to help people do some meaning making, and what do you want to do with this now in light of all that has happened and all that you know. What do you want to do now? And then I need a plan. Often, especially if you are in like a nonprofit ministry, you are in a church ministry, your care seekers are people that you're going to see again and again. And so you need a plan, because when they talk to you, you may, let's say you see them for an hour, it's not over. You may have been able to give them some tools in that hour, but you have probably identified some needs that need to be addressed. And so now you need a plan. What does your agency, institution, or you have to help them address these needs that you have now identified? What ongoing support can I provide for this care seeker? And that is super important, because what you don't want to do is leave people hanging. You talk to them, you've identified a need, and then you're like, okay, well, good to talk to you. I need a plan. And so sometimes at the hospital, I work on weekends. So sometimes, especially if I know that that person is going to be in the hospital for an extended amount of time, some of my plan is to send another chaplain behind me to continue to check on them and provide care, because they're going to need that ongoing support to stay connected, since their outside connection can't get to them. It's like during the pandemic, that was really an important thing. And so I'm going to refer them, like, okay, I'm gonna have this other chaplain go. I'm not there, but they can provide care to them and check on them and support them as they're going through this crisis. Sometimes It will be, if you're in an organization or a institution, a church, a nonprofit agency, whatever, it may be connecting them to resources within your community that can provide them with the care that they need. But you've got to have a plan. You got to have a plan. Sometimes your plan will be having them come back to meet with you to help them with some more tools that you can give. But remember, the goal of my plan is not to have people reliant on me to help save them. The goal of my plan is to give them support and tools so that they can care for themselves when they don't see me no more. That's the goal, giving folks tools so that they can live healthy spiritual lives. That's really the goal here. Just like, you may go to the doctor and have a yearly physical, maybe every 6 months, if you have a lot of healthcare issues. But when you go, they give you tools. Okay, here's the medicine that I want you to take. I want you to start, exercising every day, or I want you to do this, that, and then you're going to come back in 6 months and we're going to check this, and that. And so the plan is to give that person tools to recognize that I don't need to carry them. They're not a baby. These are, most of the time, these are grown adults that are our care seekers, and I want to give them the tools so that they can care for themselves. And honestly, y'all, who is giving us these tools? I don't know a lot of places that are giving us tools so that we can really provide the spiritual care for ourselves and we can live a healthy spiritual life and address the crisis that comes into our life. And the good thing about giving people tools, it's give a man a fish, he eats for a day, teach a man to fish, he eats for a lifetime. This is the point. I don't want anybody reliant on me for their spiritual care. I want to walk beside them as they learn to use the tools that I'm going to give them. I want to be what I like to call a hopeful companion. I have hope and I believe that you can do this. You have autonomy, you have agency, you have strength that you can draw on, internal and external, and you can do this. And how can we get you a support system as you do this? So that's what I'm saying when I mean spiritual care, assessment, care response, plan. Assessment, what in the world is going on? Care response, how can I meet the immediate needs in this moment? Plan, how can I meet the ongoing needs and help this person find tools to meet their own needs? Because it's important. It's important. All right. Well, that is our final slide for tonight. To recap, there is a difference between spirituality and religion. When we're providing spiritual care, we're looking on that spiritual side where we are talking about where people find meaning and purpose, where they find connection with the divine, the transcendent, with themselves and with others. And we're looking at, how should I live? What values do I have that will help me identify how I want to live my life? When I am providing care to a person, my religious preference, my religious beliefs guide me in how I should live and how I should engage with this person. Their religious beliefs and preference, their spiritual beliefs guide them. And to be a hopeful companion, I'm going to explore with them what's important to them so that when I'm gone, they have that tool of exploration that they can do for themselves. When I'm providing spiritual care, here's an easy structure: assessment. What in the world is going on here in this story that they're telling me? How can I identify their needs within this story? What am I going to do in response to what I've assessed? And how am I going to get them some ongoing support to help them care for themselves in the future? Well, I had fun, y'all. This was a good time. I had a good time. I hope to continue to interact with you about this particular module. And as we go forward, I will be interacting with you about our future modules as well. Please talk to me in the comments. Ask me any questions you need. I am here for you. As we go forward, I do want you to know that you can contact me at renitawalker.com. You can click on the Funky Chaplain and you will find information about me there about how you can continue to engage with me. If you would like me to do this for your organization, again, hit renitawalker.com and you will be able to connect with me there. Next week, remember, we are on a break, but the week after, we are going to come back and we are going to do our social location and do our cultural competency model where we can identify our biases and learn to address them so that we can, at the very least, not harm anybody, and at best, provide good spiritual care. I enjoyed y'all, and I will see you next time. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it.